to assist our clients, including governments at federal, provincial, and municipal levels, to identify and close strategic and operational gaps, providing specialized knowledge and services in areas where support is required. We consider our services to be an important part of our contribution to Canadian society. We are known for our tax, advisory, and auditing services. And as you know, we are the auditor for the House of Commons. We also provide a comprehensive range of services that help Canadian businesses address many of the most pressing economic and social challenges we face as a country. Notably, this includes public health and cybersecurity, which is why we are here to talk to you today. At the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the government urgently looked for outside expertise and invited vendors to respond to a public request for proposal. KPMG responded by competing in this procurement process and was selected as one of 6 vendors under the COVID Emergency Professional Services, or CEPS, contracting vehicle. This competitive process and the resulting contract provided government departments and agencies with the ability to engage firms like KPMG for specialized global expertise. Our engagement with the government during the pandemic included work related to the ArriveCAN program, which fell into 2 streams. The first, which I led, was for the Public Health Agency of Canada. As one of Canada's largest healthcare advisory firms, the agency looked to us as they dealt with an unprecedented and rapidly evolving pandemic. In particular, we were asked to provide in-depth subject matter expertise and global knowledge to assist in developing policies and procedures for the implementation of the ArriveCAN program. We analyzed how travelers and government operations would be impacted by the evolving policies, supported extensive stakeholder engagement to solicit feedback on emerging issues, and applied international leading practices to help limit the transmission of COVID-19 to Canadians from international travel at air, land, and sea border crossings. Put simply, when the government decided to make the ArriveCAN application mandatory, we identified and helped address the significant implications of that decision for all Canadians, including travelers, government operations, and the travel industry. All of the services we provided were part of the public procurement process. The second stream of work was conducted by Mr. Nijar's team and was cybersecurity work subcontracted through GC Strategies on behalf of CBSA Canada. KPMG is known in the field for having strong expertise in cybersecurity. Between October 2021 and March of 2022, KPMG provided an independent cybersecurity assessment of the ArriveCAN application. This assessment included a review of practices, procedures, and configurations related to the ArriveCAN mobile app, web portals, and cloud hosting environment. Our work was completed on time and on budget and was reviewed and approved by CBSA. We are very proud of the services that KPMG provided to assist the government during the pandemic. We delivered highly specialized expertise at a time of unprecedented uncertainty for Canadians and the world. We recognize the importance of the committee's efforts to review this work and to ensure value for money for Canadians. In each case, we delivered our work on time and on budget using the contracting vehicle identified and directed by the government. Thank you, and we'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll begin our first round. Each of the 4 members will have 6 minutes each. Mr. Baird, I understand you're up first for the official opposition. Over to you, please, for 6 minutes.
KPMG is one of the biggest accounting firms in the world. How many offices do you have in Canada?
Thank you for the member's question. I'll answer that to the chair. I don't actually know the answer off the top of my head, but I would be happy to respond to that question immediately after.
Do you know how many staff KPMG has in Canada?
Thank you for the member's question, and I'll also try to answer that question. I do know that we have about 800 partners, and in terms of the total number of staff, again, I would have to get back to you with that answer.
So you said in your opening statement that KPMG was subcontracted by GC Strategies. So you, off the top of your head, fair enough that you're not sure. How many offices are there? Are a lot of KPMG offices and hundreds of staff. Does KPMG operate any of their offices out of the basements of suburban Ottawa residences?
Thank you for the member's question. I'll answer that to the chair. We do not have any businesses run out of basements that we're aware of.
Right. So I find it incredible that that KPMG, this massive accounting firm, with hundreds and hundreds of staff and dozens of offices ends up as a subcontractor for two dudes working out of a basement in suburban Ottawa. How much were you paid, KPMG, by GC Strategies for your work on ArriveCAN?
Thank you for the question. I can take that one as it relates to the cybersecurity piece of work. So we charged GC Strategies $400,000 for the cybersecurity piece of work that we performed for the ArriveCAN app.
So it was cybersecurity work.
Exactly, yes.
Could ArriveCAN have got off the ground without KPMG's contributions?
Thank you for your question. With respect to the ArriveCAN app, KPMG was not involved in the development of the ArriveCAN app. We were involved for the assessment of the security of the ArriveCAN app, and it was already off the ground when we were assessing it.
Did KPMG contact the Government of Canada regarding work on ArriveCAN first, or did the Government of Canada contact KPMG first?
Thank you for the member's question. I'll answer that to the chair. So KPMG initially participated in the CEPS agreement that I mentioned in the opening remarks. We were awarded a spot on that vendor of record contracting vehicle in July of 2020, and our work was subsequently contracted off of that vehicle.
And we'll just accept that all of your questions are through the chair. Thank you. How many non-competitive contracts related to ArriveCAN was KPMG awarded?
So thank you again for your question. What I'd like to say is, first of all of our work was contracted through the government's vehicles, procurement vehicles that were directed to us.
Understood. Just the number of non-competitive contracts, please.
So the contracts that were directed to KPMG for and I'm talking about the public health agency work at this point, we had a TA that was directed to us through the CEPS vehicle, and then there were two subsequent contracts that were directed to us through public health agency.
So the number's 3.
For the public health agency related work.
And those non-competitive contracts were amended multiple times, yes or no, please?
Sorry, thank you for the member's question. I just want to confirm that the initial TA was through the competitive CEPS vehicle, so that was competitively awarded and then subsequently directed to us. And sorry, could you repeat the second question, please?
The contracts were amended multiple times, yes or no?
Thank you for the member's question. And yes, our contracts were amended a few times.
So those amendments saw the fee for service increase, the length of time for the contract increase, and the deliverables reduced. Is that correct?
Thank you for the member's question. So the initial TA and the initial contract through Public Health Agency were incredibly detailed in terms of deliverables and key activities we were asked to provide. The subsequent and the final contract that was awarded by the Public Health Agency was less so by Public Health Agency, specifically because you have to remember that this was during the third and fourth wave of the pandemic, and they required more flexibility because of wanting to be able to respond to unforeseen events and policy changes at the time.
So just for clarity, the Auditor General said in her report that KPMG had contracts amended to do exactly what I detailed. Add additional costs, make the deliverables over a longer period of time with less specific deliverables. Do you agree with the Auditor General's assessment? Yes or no, please.
Thank you for the member's question, and we agree with the Auditor General report findings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who in the government was KPMG's contact for the non-competitive contracts that KPMG received?
So
the name of the individual at the department, please.
So I'd be happy to start just the description of that through the Public Health Agency work, and then I might ask Hartaj to speak to the other contract.
You have about 10 seconds to get us a name before the end of my time,
So
please.
we were contacted through the CEPS vehicle to work with the Public Health Agency under Sharif Abdu.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Turning now to Ms. Bradford, who's joining us virtually. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please, Ms. Bradford. You're on mute, Ms. Bradford. And I've not started
I'm always
clock yet.
best on me.
Very good. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So thank you for the witnesses for coming today. So some of this might be a bit repetitive from your opening comments, but I just want to get it on the record. Could you please help the committee members and Canadians watching from home to understand what specific services were provided for the $5 million received in government contracts by KPMG for the Arrive Canada app? And what work did KPMG specifically provide for this?
And I can definitely take that for the public health agency work, and then I'll ask my colleague Hartosh to speak to the cybersecurity work in a moment. So the work that we did to support the public health agency was focused primarily on helping them to analyze and plan for the operational impacts of all of the evolving policies that were happening under the Quarantine Act during the pandemic. So this included detailed stakeholder and extensive stakeholder engagement, both within government and helping them to facilitate discussions outside of government, for example, with the travel sector, air operators, and so on. We also were asked to provide global leading expertise and access to information through KPMG's global network of colleagues to help inform policies that we're forming here in Canada. So, for example, we reached out through our global network to the 5 I countries, to other jurisdictions to learn how they were handling the COVID-19 pandemic quarantine restrictions, eventually how they were handling things like lab testing, vaccine administration, documentation, and so on for international travel. The other thing, too, that I'll just mention is that at that time, KPMG was providing very specialized expertise to the Public Health Agency to address what we understood were some capability gaps in terms of being able to quickly support their detailed planning in things like human-centered design, because we were trying to understand what the traveler's experience would be through all of these policy changes and operational changes at the borders. So we were developing journey maps, process designs, all in very, very rapid pace to support their constantly evolving policy environment. So that was essentially the nature of the work that we did under the Public Health Agency, but maybe I'll let Hartosh speak to the other work.
Sure. So with respect to the cybersecurity work, there were 5 primary bodies of work. The first was to assess the vulnerability management practices around the ArriveCAN environment. So that is to do with how do you identify vulnerabilities and mitigate vulnerabilities in a timely manner. The second was to assess compliance with certain privacy regulations, in particular surrounding the cloud hosting platform. The third was to assess the cloud hosting platform itself to understand if appropriate security controls were embedded. The fourth was to understand whether appropriate incident response processes were in place such that if there were an incident or a breach of some sort, would it be possible to respond and recover in a timely fashion? And the last was to do with understanding whether appropriate security practices were integrated within the development processes.
Okay, thank you for those detailed responses. So can you confirm the total amount that KPMG received for this work on the ArriveCAN application?
Thank you for the member's question. I'll just want to reconfirm that KPMG did not do any work on the development of the app itself. However, for the Public Health Agency work that was contracted to KPMG, we invoiced about $4.5 million before taxes. And
for the cybersecurity work, we invoiced $400,000 for that work.
Okay, thank you so much. So it is the approximately $5 million. Can you please explain why KPMG was not able to receive a contract directly from the government or CBSA in this case to work on the ArriveCAN app or the work that you provided in this process? And why did they need to be subcontracted by GC Strategies?
Thank you for your question. I can take that one as I believe it relates to the cybersecurity work. KPMG would have been proud to contract under any vehicle or even to bid in a competitive RFP process. We were asked to subcontract through GC Strategies and we complied with the government's request.
So how was the decision made on KPMG's end to become a subcontractor for GC Strategies? You said they reached out. What was the process involved where you made that decision that you would subcontract through GC Strategies?
So thank you again for the question. So when KPMG is contracting with a party, be it a client or a partner or an entity, we have rigorous client acceptance and engagement acceptance processes which we must follow in every case. And we followed those processes to understand if there would be any adverse considerations in engaging with GC Strategies. And at the time, our results showed that there were no adverse considerations in contracting with GC Strategies, given that they were at the time a well-known entity in the government sector, and we were being asked to contract with them by the government.
Have either one of you met with Christian Firth or Darren Anthony, either one of you?
Thank you for your question. I have not met with either of those individuals, and I believe Ms. Lee has also not met with those individuals.
I have not.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford. That is the time. Coming up next is our Bloc Québécois member, so you might want to have your earpiece ready if it's not already. Madame Secrétaire Desgagnés pour 6 minutes. On prend les deux langues officielles au sérieux ici.
Ms. Sinclair Desjardins, you have 6 minutes, and if there's any delays for the translation, I would like to get a few extra seconds so that we don't, thinking of the Francophones, thank you for coming here. At the outset, I did my career in your field. I know how things work. Setting aside the capital itself, what's the most important thing in the Big Four is the reputation. And at that time, the reputation of KGBM, at least in the eyes of this committee, and according to the report of the Auditor General, has been dealt an adverse blow. Thank you very much for coming and answering our questions. My first question is, with respect to the contract that you were subtracted to do through GC Strategies, who in the government asked whom in KHMP to accept to be a subcontractor for GC Strategies? And I would prefer to have a very brief answer, please.
Thank you for your question. So KPMG was contacted by a CBSA official, and his name was Mr. Antonio Utano.
And this individual asked the KGMP, a company with 10,000 employees, I do know that for a fact, to accept to be a subcontractor and to lose out on part of the profits that you could have done had you had a direct conference with the government. So it's Mr. Antonio who asked you to become a subcontractor with GC Strategies. First of all, why would you have accepted that?
Thank you for your question. KPMG would have charged the government the same amount that we charged to GC Strategies for the work that we actually performed. With respect to the work, we were asked to submit a proposal to GC Strategies, and our assumption was when KPMG is asked to submit a proposal, our assumption is others are also asked to submit a similar proposal, and the proposal that is ultimately the best is awarded the work.
Merci, je sais très bien comment ça marche.
Thank you. I know how it works. Why did you agree to be a subcontractor to a two-person company? Yes, perhaps you charge the same amount, but you know full well that there's something that doesn't smell right when you, for example, you knew that any consultant who is awarded a contract with someone else must fill out forms with respect to risk assessment. And do you not think that GC Strategy had a risk involved with it for a company like yours? KPMG should have seen this, and somebody who working on the project should have understood that there was a huge risk working with a two-person company. This is a real reputational risk, and you're the evidence of that today.
Thank you for your question. So, as indicated earlier, KPMG does follow rigorous client acceptance processes, and at the time, GC Strategies was an organization that had been working in the government sector for a number of years. successfully, and they had a large government contract, and they were well known in the government sector industry. And our checks did not indicate any adverse implications of engaging with GC Strategies. Furthermore, KPMG was directed to do so by the government, and so we had understood that the government had followed its own processes to vet GC Strategies as well.
D'accord. Mais donc, si vous avez accepté...
So if you agree to this and you were aware of its reputation, you were aware of GC Strategies, you said you didn't know the two people who agreed to work with GC Strategies.
Thank you for your question. So KPMG as a whole agreed to work with GC Strategies, and then we deployed an engagement team to work directly with the CBSA once we'd been notified that the proposal was successful. And then we submitted our engagement letters to GC Strategies, and once they informed us that the engagement letters were approved, we then worked directly with the CBSA.
Vous dites KPMG au total, mais il y a une personne...
You say that KPMG in a whole, but is there an associate or a chief director who agreed to contact with GC Strategy? There was a full team that worked with them, or at least in providing the work to GC Strategy so they in turn could deliver the work to the government. Could you tell me how many people were part of this team and who was in direct contact with GC Strategies? Who in KPMG was in direct contact with GC Strategy and was aware of the reputation?
Thank you for your question. There was a full team deployed to complete the work, security cleared at various different levels, from partner all the way down to senior consultant level, to complete the work in the time that it took. In terms of the contract itself, so it was signed by a partner in our cybersecurity team within Ottawa, and he engaged directly with GC Strategies just for the contract, and then once that was done, then we had very little to do with...
travaille-t-il encore pour KPMG?
Does this associate still work for KPMG?
Thank you. Yes, he does. Yes.
Et pourquoi n'est-il pas là aujourd'hui, sachant que c'est lui qui...
And why isn't he here today, given that he's the one who dealt with GC Strategy? He should be here today to answer questions put to him by our committee.
Thank you for your question. So the reason I am here today is because I'm the national leader of cybersecurity, so any work that we perform underneath cybersecurity falls within my purview and my responsibility.
Il y a des chaises vides à côté de vous. Il aurait dû être prêt.
There are some empty chairs beside you. He should have been here to explain his relationship with GC Strategies. We asked to deal with people who had direct information with respect to ArriveCAN and who had direct contact with GC Strategy. You should have known that the empty chairs should have been filled by someone. I'm finished, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Desjardins, Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being present with us today. I want to turn to, I think, a few topics that Canadians are most concerned about in relation to KPMG's work and the work of GC Strategies, the Public Health Agency of Canada, and the CBSA. What is becoming clear in this is that there's certainly a network that is operating when government contracts are either disposed of by way of individuals within the CBSA, like we see through ArriveCAN, that have largely, in some ways, influenced the decision of contractors. Mr. Najjar, you just mentioned that, quote, GC Strategies was well known as a government contractor and a trusted source. Why is it that you come to that conclusion in relation to GC Strategies? Who told you that they were trusted, or how long have they been in your network to suggest that they're a trusted partner of that of the government or that of KPMG?
Thank you for your question. So in terms of GC Strategies being well known in the community, they had worked in that particular industry sector for a number of years, well over 5 years, and that was known amongst folks that work in that community within the FedGov space.
Is that because of subcontract relationship?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Just that last point you made. You said they were well known amongst the community, but how are they well known amongst the community? Is that because of their nature as a subcontractor? People would go to GC Strategies looking for work?
Thank you for the question. They were well known with respect to doing work in that space. My answer wasn't directly with respect to them being sort of a prime for subcontracting work.
I'm trying to understand, and I hope that you can sympathize with Canadians who are trying to understand this relationship. How is it that non-competitive contracts were awarded to 3 groups in particular that were known to each other, that you said were known amongst the community? I'm trying to discover or understand why this relationship or network exists. Is it because of GC strategies as a conduit for subcontractors, because of their knowledge of subcontractors, that they could secure government contracts? Was that known to the community? Is that also well known?
So thank you for your question. At the time, so KPMG were asked to subcontract with GC Strategies. As I mentioned earlier, we would have been more than happy to contract through the SEPS vehicle, and we would have
So
charged...
can you repeat that last part? You were directed to work with GC Strategies?
Yes, we were asked to work with GC Strategies, and we would have been more than happy to...
Who directed you to work with GC Strategies?
It was the CBSA.
So the CBSA directed you to participate in a non-competitive contract?
Thank you for your question. The CBA asked us to submit a proposal to GC Strategies for the cybersecurity piece of work, and we submitted a proposal. And at the time, our assumption was, again, being asked to submit a proposal, that it was an ask that may have gone to others as well.
Did you or anyone in KPMG raise a concern about the use of a non-competitive contract for the purpose of this work, knowing that you're a firm of auditors?
So thank you for your question. At the time, we were being asked to submit the proposal by the government, and we assumed that the government was using vehicles that were authorized. And again, we were under the assumption that there may be others also being asked to submit a proposal in a similar capacity. And so we were under the assumption it was somewhat competitive.
KPMG is a very large firm. You know, you do work across the country and albeit across the world. You spoke about your global network and the ability to second information very quickly. So it makes sense that you could have raised the alarm or concern that you would be more competitive than GC Strategies, don't you think?
Well, again, thank you for your question. We do not, KPMG does not know why the government chose the particular mode of contract it did. At the time, all we knew was that the government had asked us around our capabilities for this piece of work and had asked us to submit the proposal to GC Strategies. We did not also know the relationship that GC Strategies had with the government, or indeed what they were going to be charging the government for the piece of work that we ultimately performed.
And just to that point, and I appreciate your frankness of these answers, the value of the task authorization and the total contracts you mentioned for cybersecurity, let's focus on that for a second. The cybersecurity work that you had just mentioned in previous questions, that totaled the amount of $400,000, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
However, when we look at the task authorization submitted by GC Strategies, it totaled $540,000, the invoices of which are $40,000. Would assume that $90,000 went to GC Strategies. Would you agree? Or did KPMG take a share of that?
Thank you for your question. KPMG is unaware of the figure that GC Strategies charged to the government. We did not have any line of sight or visibility into that at all.
The Auditor General found that the Public Health Agency of Canada awarded a professional contract task authorization using a non-competitive approach to KPMG. However, found no documentation of the initial communications or the reasons why the agency did not consider or select another eligible contract to carry out the work. And you confirmed some of these details with us today. Do you or KPMG have any communication, email or communication by letter or mail, to the effect of those contracts, and how this information could be supplied to our committee in regards to the initial communications for the work on the task authorization to KPMG?
Thank you for the member's question. I'll take that one. So with respect to the initial task authorization, as I said, we were direct contracted through the SEPS vehicle that I mentioned earlier. For the subsequent contracts that were directly contracted through the Public Health Agency, We were under the impression that the Public Health Agency was providing documentation and justification to their contracting authority to provide the reasons for the direct award. We don't have any email communications as such that you're identifying, but we were under the impression that they had provided the documentation to their contracting authorities as required.
So you have
Thank
no
you. Mr.
information
Digilé,
about that.
that is your time. The witness.
Thank you, Chair.
I want to make sure the witness had a fulsome time for answer, but you're over. Turning now to beginning our second round. Our second round consists of six slots. Mr. Brock, you have the first, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for your attendance today. Since Justin Trudeau formed government, KPMG has been one of the leading recipients of government contracts to the tune of almost $250 million. Of that, we hear today your work surrounding the ArriveCAN app and implementation is roughly $5 million. Now, I've listened very carefully to your evidence. I've heard references to the CBSA. I've heard references to public health. Have there been any other ministries involved?
Thank you very much for the member's question. KPMG has been doing business with the federal government for many years.
Not asking that question. In relation to the ArriveCAN app and implementation, were you working other than with public health and CBSA, any other ministries?
Thank you for the member's question, and thank you for clarifying the question. For the Public Health Agency work we did, we were aware that there were ongoing discussions with other government departments as part of operational implementation of the program. We were not contracted by, nor did we have any direct contracting or procurement-related discussions as it related to ArriveCAN to support that work.
Okay, so let's talk about the contracts. We talked about the competitive contract that you were asked to bid on. We also know through the Auditor General's report there were a number of non-competitive contracts that you were ultimately awarded. So just the number, how many were competitive and how many were non-competitive?
Thank you for the member's question. So the initial TA was the competitive SEPs. So that was the.
Is that the only one?
For the.
Is that the only one that was competitive?
That is correct for the Public Health Agency related work.
Right.
And if I may, there were then 2 subsequent contracts directly awarded by the Public Health Agency to KPMG.
That were non-competitive?
That is correct.
Okay.
They were directed to us.
Okay. And what about through CBSA?
Thank you. The work that we did on the cybersecurity front, there were 2 contracts that were with GC Strategies. There was no contract direct with the CBSA.
You were non-competitive as well, correct?
Thank
you
you.
weren't bidding with other companies. You were asked to work with GC Strategies, so it was a non-competitive contract.
Thank you. We were asked to submit a proposal to GC Strategies.
Which was ultimately granted.
Which was granted.
Right. So 2 with CBSA, 2 with PACP, that's 4, and 1 was competitive for $5 million. How many employees for those 5 contracts worked on that for $5 million? How many employees at KPMG?
Thank you for the member's question. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I can say that over the close to 2.5 years of time that we supported the Public Health Agency, we had a number of people. So I was the engagement partner, but we had a number of people. I think on the original TA, we might have had 10 or 15 people that were identified that participated in some initial stakeholder engagement.
Okay.
And then as time went on, we had.
So let's move on to the issue now that you were directed by CBSA to work directly with GC Strategies. You indicated, sir, when pressed, that was Mr. Antonio Utano, right?
Thank you for your question. That is correct.
Yes. Did he reach out directly to you or another partner?
Thank you. Mr. Utano reached out to our federal government practice. And
what does that mean?
So KPMG has a number of industry specialists.
Yeah. Who did he speak with at KPMG?
Thank you. He ultimately spoke with a partner in our cybersecurity.
Who?
So the partner's name in the cybersecurity team was Mr. Imran Bashir.
Okay. All right. And how was that communicated? Was it a phone call? Was it an email? Was it a text?
Thank you. The initial conversation was through email.
Through
the
email.
initial reach out was through email.
Do you
yes.
still have a copy of that email?
Thank you. I would need to investigate and check.
Okay, I'll be asking you, within the time permitted by this committee, to tender that email. In fact, any and all correspondence, written correspondence, whether that's snail mail, email, a text message, any correspondence between CBSA and KPMG to work specifically with GC. Can you provide that to us?
Thank you. We will definitely have a look to see what we have and what we can provide and get back to you.
Okay. Were you communicating at all with any other member of the CBSA team?
Thank you for your question. No, not to my knowledge.
Were you communicating with any elected official? The
Thank you
president
again.
of the CBSA, the deputy minister, the minister of public safety,
Mr. Brock, your
anything
time
like
is up.
that?
I'm going to allow an answer, but
Thank you. No.
All right.
thank you very much.
And Chair, could we identify the timeline, please?
So yes, I will at the end, but yes, we'll come back to requested documents, and I will explain how that works. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Joining us virtually, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Just to build a little bit of context in some of the questions that my colleague had asked. Now, how much did the Harper government award to KPMG while they were in power?
Thank you for the member's question. I'm not aware of the answer to that question, but as I said before, KPMG has been very proud to support the federal government for a very long time, for many, many years, well before this body of work.
Are you able to get us an answer to that question?
Thank you very much for the member's question. We can certainly endeavor to check that out and follow up with the committee afterward if you like.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, I know that the issue that we're discussing here is not whether the ArriveCAN app was a success or a failure. We're talking about the costs of the app. And, there's been a lot of disappointment, myself included, as to how this money was spent and the process through our federal government as to how it was spent. But it seems to be more and more a systemic problem. And you, having worked with various governments over past decades, perhaps can help us understand that a little bit. Now, I know that when the Conservatives were in power, they were paying Deloitte $90,000 a day to teach them how to cut costs. And there was a quote from the late Jim Flaherty, who was the finance minister, who says, "Private sector advice is valuable, it's important, it's essential." Now, can I get perhaps your viewpoints on how the private sector does lend a hand, especially in instances where with the pandemic that we were facing?
Thank you for the member's question. I can answer that in respect of when clients reach out, and by the way, we've worked for clients at the federal level, the provincial level, the municipal level, public sector, private sector. I myself work largely in the public sector healthcare arena. And we find that when clients reach out to ask for consulting support, it's typically for two major reasons. One is that they lack specific expertise or capabilities that are required to address a specific problem within their organization. And the second reason is that perhaps they might need more capacity in a very short period of time to address time-sensitive or urgent requirements. And I think coming back to the experience that at least KPMG had in this instance that we're talking about this morning, we certainly felt that we were being asked to provide exactly support in those two areas for both Public Health Agency as well as the CBSA.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, has KPMG worked with GC strategies on other projects and any various iterations of GC strategies as they have worked with government over the years?
I can take that one. We have not worked with GC strategies prior to the engagement in question, nor have we worked with them after.
And would you be aware if GC was working under a different name, would your answer still qualify for that?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I believe my answer would qualify.
And has KPMG worked with Coradix or Dalian or Curadel companies in the past?
Thank you for your question. To my knowledge, we have not.
And how do you, as in KPMG, work with your employees and your contractors as they work with government to ensure that that there is no overlap or conflict between government employees and KPMG as a consulting agency? Is there a conflict that you provide checks on?
For any engagement that KPMG takes on, we have a rigorous not only client acceptance and engagement acceptance process, but a conflict check process as well to understand if there are any independence or conflict issues that may arise. We take those matters extremely seriously, and those are performed on every engagement.
And what kind of checks do you look for conflict?
Thank you. We look for relationships, personal relationships, family relationships. There's a series of questions that we must answer for the engagement team and for the engagement partner with respect to any relationships that they may have with the organization and things of that nature.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Najjar. And Ms. Lee, those are all my questions today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khalid. Maintenant, encore une fois, once again, Madame Secrétaire Desgagnés, vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to the associate who dealt with GC strategies, I believe you mentioned him, Imran Bashir. Could you please spell his family name?
Thank you for your question. His name is spelt Bashir.
Parfait. Merci, je l'avais bien noté.
Thank you. I've noted that. This individual, when he filled out what is called at KPMG, where I did work, before you sign a contract, you have to look at risk evaluation. This individual should have seen that it was not usual for a government official, a government employee, ask that that you be a subcontractor to GC strategies. This employee, particularly if he's an associate, is someone who should have known the reputational risk, should have realized that there was a problem with this. Now, I'd like to have a written answer from this individual because this person should have been here today. I'd like a written answer. Did this individual know that GC Strategy was inviting government officials, including Mr. Antonio Utono, to events, whiskey tastings, golf tournaments? Was he aware of all that going on? And I would like to have this explained in a written answer. Thank you.
Let me just interrupt for a second here. So how the House Commons committees work is we seek information from witnesses. Members will request information, which we hope witnesses will provide. If you're agreeable to that, we typically hope for an answer within 2 or 3 weeks, at which point the committee analysts will reach out. You're probably aware of this. I'm going to state it anyway, just so you're aware. Committees have the power to call documents to be brought forward as well, and those powers are quite sweeping. So we do encourage witnesses to, as much as possible, work with the committees to provide documents. Now, it is quite an extreme measure for committees to compel documents to be brought forward, but it has happened even in this Parliament as well. So I thought I should probably just state that. I was going to say generally it's an agreeable practice. Witnesses are here to help committee members understand us and do endeavor to provide documents. But I just thought I would just give you that information, and I'll now turn the clock back on. If you have a question for me, yes, go ahead.
Is it our responsibility to remember everything that's being asked of us, or will we get a summary? Or
good question. The analysts will turn back to you and provide a list of what the committee members, which is why I also endeavor to from the chair confirm that you've understood the request as well. I would not want to put a witness in a position where a member has asked for a document and you were not aware, or the request kind of flew over in a way. I believe Mr. Brock was quite clear on what he's hoping to receive, and it was just a question of the timeline that I wanted to highlight at the end, but I thought I'd better do that right now. But yes, we will loop back around with you and provide information to you. And if there are concerns, you can flag that with the committee, and we'll of course consider that. But as I said, the powers of House Commons committees are quite sweeping when it comes to information. So I'll turn things back to you to answer that question from Madame Sinclair Dengagné about that. Or if you'd like, she can ask it again now that I've spent a few minutes. Why don't you go ahead and do that again, Natalie? I've stopped the clock, and I'll run it again once you're done the question. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay.
So I was asking his associate to provide us with a written answer, this individual who was in direct contact with GC Strategy, because Mr. Bashir aware of the fact that the two individuals from GC Strategies were inviting government members to events like whiskey tastings and golf tournaments, etc. Was he aware of this?
I'm going to start the clock again right now. If you got a minute to
J'ai
go.
combien de temps, Monsieur le Président? Une minute?
Une minute.
How much time do I have remaining? 1 minute? Thank you.
Je passerai à la...
So I will turn to my second question.
You could work with your colleague to provide.
Thank you. Yes, we can work with Mr. Bashir to try and provide that.
Thank you. The committee appreciates it. Madame Sinclair Dengagné, une minute, s'il vous plaît.
1 minute. Thank you. I'll turn to my next question. The Auditor General in a report said that when there were invoices to be submitted under this contract that KPMG had with the government, the invoices became less and less clear as to what tasks were fulfilled, and then so the price and the value of the contracts went up, and the length of time of the contract was extended, and the invoices were less specific as to what was actually done. When you fill out an invoice that's sent to a client, I know I've done this several times, normally you have to be very specific about the task performed. Even we have to do this for our accounting services. So who in KPMG authorized in the fact that imprecise invoices were sent to the government? Was this Mr. Bashir?
So thank you very much for the member's question. Maybe I'll take that for the public health agency related work. Very specifically, when we were working under the initial TA under the COVID emergency professional services vendor of record, that the very first time we were preparing an invoice, we worked extensively with the public health agency and their internal team to make sure that the documentation on the invoice was satisfactory with their requirements to process the payment and provided the level of detail that they required. So we had it all pre-approved, and that never changed throughout the entire, as I said, about 2.5 years of time that we worked with them. So, and our understanding for just furthermore, with respect to the OAG report, we were not led to believe by the Auditor General that any of those concerns were actually directed specifically towards KPMG. But as I said, the Public Health Agency pre-approved the level of detail in all of our invoices from the very beginning.
Merci beaucoup. Suivant, next up, it's Mr. Desjardins. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do now want to return to this significant problem, I believe, that could have been addressed largely through Procurement Canada's policies, but were, I think, largely avoided. Are either of you aware of the Public Service and Procurement Canada Supply Manual?
Thank you very much for the member's question. As I said, KPMG always follows the specific procurement approach that is laid out by the government. Our federal government practice is familiar with all of those policies and procedures for all of the procurement activity that we would do with the federal government.
So you're aware that there is a potential or an ability of a contractor, particularly a prime contractor like GC Strategies, general contractor they've called themselves at times, to absorb several task authorizations and then to dispose of those task authorizations by multiple subcontractors. You're aware of that practice?
And for the member's question, I specifically am not aware of all of the details of the steps that you're talking about. But as I said, and I think as Mr. Nijar has said, all of the contracting work that we did was at the government's direction throughout the entire time we worked on the ArriveCAN service.
And at the time that the CBSA did direct KPMG, was that at the beginning or the onset of that work supposed to be directly related to the work of GC strategies or the overall work of supporting the government in terms of the Public Health Agency of Canada's overall mandate, or narrowly at the time of direction by the CBSA? Who directed that you work with GC strategies?
So thank you for the member's question. Maybe I think there might be some confusion in the contract, the contracting relationship. So the Public Health Agency contracted directly with KPMG, and I was the lead partner for that work during the 2.5 years that we supported the Public Health Agency. None of that work was to do with the ArriveCAN app itself, or was to do with a relationship with GC Strategies. The only work that was done through GC Strategies was the cybersecurity audit that Hartaj is speaking about. So we can, I hope that clarifies.
It does clarify it in some way. So CBSA only directed, in the very particular instance, the work related to ArriveCAN. You're saying not the work at Public Health Agency.
Member's question, and that is correct, yes.
Chair, how much time?
If
Do I
you
time
have
for
a
another
quick one.
In regards to who directed the who directed KPMG from CBSA, has any further communication between the CBSA and KPMG of that individual continued past the time of the original contract?
Thank you for your question. Not to my knowledge.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Mr. Nader. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. I want to clarify a few points because I'm rather troubled by what I've heard here this morning. So, to understand this, a senior Government of Canada official came to KPMG and said, "We know you have the qualifications to perform $400,000 worth of cybersecurity assessments, but we're not going to contract with you directly. Instead, we want you to go through this two-person basement firm, which will also take a $90,000 cut, rather than dealing directly with CBSA." Am I understanding this correctly? A senior government official came to you and said, "Go through GC strategies." Is that correct?
The government official asked us to submit a proposal for the cybersecurity work to GC Strategies.
Is this something that you've experienced personally in the past, where a government official has directed you outside of the direct contracting connection relationship to a third party, for lack of a better phrase, middleman, middle company?
Thank you again for your question. KPMG is often asked to subcontract by small, medium, and large-scale organizations where they do not have the capabilities to deliver on the specific piece of work or the requirements, and where they feel as though KPMG can deliver the work at a very high-quality level. So subcontracting is not unusual for us.
I want to follow up on that, though, but here's the concern. I'm not going to quibble about KPMG's ability to deliver on contracts. Obviously, you're a large, successful firm. There's no question about that. Where I have a concern is that GC Strategies is not an IT firm. They don't have capabilities, period. And so it's not a matter of subcontracting for another like-minded business or similar business. This is a subcontract from someone who had no capabilities. Did this not raise any flags whatsoever that this was being subcontracted, that the government of Canada was asking you to, instead of contracting directly, to go through a third-party, GC Strategies, which had no capabilities to do this contract, which you were qualified to do?
Thank you. And again, as mentioned earlier, at the time we did follow our strict client engagement processes and practices. And at the time of the engagement, there was nothing that stood out as peculiar from those processes and practices that we followed in following the instructions from the government in contracting with GC Strategies on this specific piece of work, and at a time that was unprecedented, and it was an opportunity to help Canadians, and we complied with the ask.
I just think Canadians might be concerned by what seems to be a very cozy relationship that GC Strategies seem to enjoy with senior government officials, where contracts are being awarded through third parties to make this work. We know hundreds of these middlemen type company are being used. I want to address one final point before I run out of time, though, and that's about developing details and the specifics of contracts. Has KPMG ever helped the government draft calls for proposals that you then bid on?
Thank you very much for the member's question, and the answer is no, KPMG has not participated in that process.
And would that be something that would be outside of the normal practice for a firm like yours or any other firm, or ought it to be?
Thank you very much for the member's question. Vast majority of the work that we would do for the government, whether it's federal, provincial, or municipal level, is competitively bid work through requests for proposals. And as I said before, we would not be involved in developing those kinds of qualifications or criteria in advance of an RFP.
I want to quickly address the issue of cybersecurity work that you undertook. The Auditor General noted some concerns with cybersecurity work in general, wherein reliability security status was not held by those who undertook the work. Was your firm fully qualified and fully cleared in terms of reliability security clearance?
Thank you, Mr. Nader. That is your time. I turn now to Ms. Shanahan joining us virtually. You have the floor for 5 minutes, Ms. Shanahan.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And I, too, want to thank the witnesses for being with us here today. It is unusual for public accounts to hear from witnesses outside the Government of Canada. But given that your firm also audits the House of Commons, you're certainly not unfamiliar with the way we work, and I think you're providing some very interesting insights here today as to how consultants work with the government. And indeed, I just want to reiterate the words of one of my colleagues earlier about the importance of the Government of Canada being able to contract the kind of expertise that your firm represents, as was done under the former Harper government, in the words of the late Jim Flaherty, whom I had great respect for, that the private sector advice is critical to helping the government conduct its work. And that, in that case, it was $90,000 a day contract to cut public sector workers, which I think, in hindsight, I think we need to review that. But that being said, certainly in the time of the pandemic, an emergency situation, crises, no one knew what was going on. It was all hands on deck, wasn't it, between the public sector, the private sector, across the board. And I think, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, that the global network that KPMG had was certainly very instrumental. So my first question is, why do you think that PHAC thought that KPMG was the best fit to complete the work that you were contracted for?
Thank you very much for the member's question. I think there were a number of factors that we understood played into the evaluation through the SEPS vehicle to begin with, and then the subsequent awarding of the TA to KPMG. As I did mention, so I myself have very in-depth, over 25 years of direct experience